Good afternoon, everyone. This is Daniel Hargreaves with CSINext, and we are excited for Kent Kile, FCSI CDT CCPR with PPG Paints, and we're always glad when PPG Paints steps up. They're our platinum sponsor, and by that they have kicked us off and are doing a wonderful job in getting our scholarship going. And we had our first scholarship award winner last fall, and we're continuing that program with the support of Kent and PPG. His presentation today is more than volume solids. If you've ever heard or been to any of Kent's presentations, a lot of useful information, and I don't think this one will fall short either. With that, on the line is our president-elect for the CSINext chapter, Catherine, and she is going to catch us up on a little bit of chapter business and then hand it off to Kent. Kathy, go for it.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everybody. It's great to talk to you. I'm trying to find the list of the upcoming meetings so I could tell you what to expect for next month, but it appears to be that I can't find it yet. So my apologies for being completely unorganized. Just so that we don't waste any more of your valuable time, I'm going to hand it off to Kent so that he can start us in on what we've all come to hear. So Kent, tell us all about the economics of paint and what's important to know.
Thank you, Catherine. I sure appreciate that. It's good to have y'all with us today. I trust you can see everything here, that the economics of paint more than volume solids. My name's Kent Kile. I am architectural representative for PPG Paints in Tennessee, but I'm also a active CSI member throughout the state of Tennessee and the Gulf States region and so on. And it's great to be with CSINext today. And over the next hour or so, we'll have the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about paint from the point of view, kind of building on several different things that we have done with CSINext in the past years in terms of other programs. We've done a program for you, the technology of paint and coatings, that kind of talked about some of the ingredients of paint. We'll kind of review those as a brief part of our conversation today. And then we're going to get into a little bit more of the mathematics of paint and move forward with some interesting information, hopefully, for you about paint. I'm kind of talking over my slides here a little bit. That's just a little bit of information about me. But I want to do a quick little preview of PPG Paints for you. And in the next few minutes, just talk a little bit about who we are. Some of you may know us as Porter Paints, others may know us as Pittsburgh Paints, and some may know us as Glidden Professional. We've combined all those companies into PPG Paints, and you will see in any of those markets where you may be familiar with Porter, Pittsburgh, or Glidden, that we will be now branded as PPG Paints. You will see that on our stores, you'll see that on our buckets, and you can still find some of those brands through our dealer network, but our company store network is working under the PPG Paints label now. And all these companies have come together as either regional or national brands throughout the past several years to create this new branding of PPG Paints. So that's kind of a brief overview of that. You know a company by the awards that they win and things of that nature, and PPG is at the top of the heap when it comes to that. We're a Fortune 200 company and one of the largest paint companies in the world, depending upon which review you're looking at. We're either number one or number two in the world in terms of our paint sales. So with that, we are also very involved in a lot of different aspects of paint when it comes to the sustainability aspect of it, our social responsibility there, and our customer awards of multiple natures from different suppliers such as John Deere. A little brief video here for you.
Safeguard 737. Also protect 737 Main Street. They keep a highway graffiti-free and a hallway crayon-free. Brighten a fire engine and even a fire engine red fence. How? They're all from the same place, PPG, where the paints and coatings we perfect for industry also protect your family. PPG, we protect and beautify the world.
You'll find us a lot of different places. You'll find us on Titleist golf balls, where the clear coating on Titleist golf balls, where the green and yellow on John Deere tractors, where the coatings on Harley Davidson motorcycles. We are the yellow cat yellow on cat equipment. And we're also the paint on the outside of Southwest Airlines airplanes. Interesting thing about that is the fact that that purple blue color that they use on their jets, that color actually helps to keep the inside of the jet cooler. We work off a technology that kind of emulates eggplant. You think about an eggplant, it has a very dark color on the outside, but the inside being white and it's cool. We've used a similar technology to be able to create an aircraft paint that will do exactly the same thing, that it deflects the energy as that it's supplied to the sun, and it allows the inside of that aircraft to stay cooler along the way. And also for those of you that are NASCAR fans, we're also on Penske race cars and a sponsor of Penske race cars. So if you have a specific driver that you like, hopefully it's a Penske driver, and you'll see some PPG paints there. We have a new color eye called the NYX that's available to interior designers. Should you need it, it's a great little tool to read color, and it'll give you the closest color in our fan deck. And it's an item that we could certainly get to you if you have any interest in that. My contact information will be at the end of this particular presentation, and we can get that to you. We're also very heavily invested in BIM Smith, Attriview, and BSD SpecLink, among others. But we are very much involved with electronic specifications. So if you're using any of these subscriptions, we certainly have a PPG products available in those specifications for you. And again, if you need any help with that or any questions about that kind of thing, I'm available at the end of this presentation or anytime thereafter. If you noticed on one of our slides, we said 75 reps in the field. This is by not a long shot, not 75 people here, but this was our team just a few years ago. When we were at Construct in Providence, Rhode Island just a few years ago, this is what the size team that we have. And now we have increased that team significantly to help in the field and to help people in architectural specifications and color to have a larger opportunity to work with PPG, and vice versa for us to work with you. This program is registered for AIA for one learning unit, and the sign-in sheet, I guess, is being taken care of by CSINext. You get that to me. If you need a certificate, we can certainly get that to you, and we will get this program on file for you in the next couple of weeks. So this course is designed to help educate you on the economics of paint. We're going to talk about volume solids of paint and what that actually means. And we're going to talk about surface preparation and things of that nature, and how we can better give you a long-term protective value that on the front end may look like it costs more, but whenever we take a look at it from the cost per years of service, that it actually gives you better longevity. So if you will give me a little bit of time here to make the case on this thing, we'll start moving forward with this. And our learning our learning objectives for today are to understand the basic paint and math, and then 4 types of ingredients that go into paint, and then review information that's found on data pages. If you've not looked at a paint data page lately, paint manufacturers have similar information on there, but we'll kind of point out some of the features and benefits of that data, and maybe make it more relevant or available to you in terms of a way that you can use it in a more ongoing basis. Then we're going to discuss this cost per square foot per year of service, and then we're also going to understand that better paint products can make for longer paint service, depending upon surface preparation and some of the other factors along with that. So to run through the basics of paint, it's a semi-viscous liquid that's made up of pigment, additives, solvent, and resin. Those are the 4 basic ingredients in paint. We'll have a slide here to kind of point that out. And then 1 mil or 0.001 inch of liquid cover is 1,604 square feet. That might seem like a very ambiguous number, but it's a number that kind of gives us a starting point whenever we're talking about how much a liquid can cover on a surface, and we'll talk about that in more detail. And then volume solids is what's left once the solvents have evaporated out of the paint product. In essence, really, you're buying that volume solids whenever everything's all said and done. but it's a necessity in paint to be able to have that solvent in there to carry it from point A to point B and get it on the surface, and then it evaporates off into the atmosphere. So when we look at volume solids, if we had a 38% volume solids product and we had a 50% volume solids product, which one's better? And many times people would say, well, the one with 50% volume solids would definitely be better. Well, is that really the case? And we're going to kind of talk through that as part of our program today. So volume solids is literally just a number until we understand the ingredients and what makes up that bucket of paint. And so with that, we have a volatile portion of paint and we have a non-volatile portion of it. And the binder and pigment stay on the surface as the solvent dissipates off the surface. And then the vehicle is made up of the solvent and partially the binder. There's a liquid component to the binder that evaporates off with the solvent and leaves us the binder and pigment left on that surface. So quality paint, how do you know what the quality of paint really is? If you take a look at the data page or take a look at the label, you can get a little bit of an understanding about that. But we need to talk about what kind of resin we have in the paint product. Is it acrylic, vinyl acrylic, a PVA, an alkyd, epoxy, urethane? All those are different types of resins, and each one of those resins have a specific feature and benefit that it needs to be used inside of. We don't want to put epoxies in exterior environment because they have a tendency to chalk. Alkyd products, same situation. They have a tendency to chalk over a period of time. So if either one of those is an issue there, then we need to kind of work around that or go to another resin type. Acrylic products and vinyl acrylic products, vinyl acrylic we probably really don't want to put in exterior exposure either for that same situation. It has a tendency to break down over a period of time. And then 100% acrylic would be our normal choice for exterior, or a urethane. And then we have other resin types we don't even have on this slide, of polysiloxanes and fluoropolymers, just to name a few. There's many, many different resin types, and each one of those is very important in terms of its features, benefits, and where to use it and where not to use it. And then with pigments, we have prime pigments, we have filler pigments, we have some that'll hide in the wet state, some that dry in the dry state. And how we mix those pigments together, along with what kind of resin type, really begins to build the structure and build the quality of the paint product that you have on a project. With solvents, we have water, mineral spirits, denatured alcohol, a wealth of different solvents out there. Some of these are not real friendly to the environment, VOCs, volatile organic compound issues. So if we're in a lead project, we're going to probably stay away from mineral spirits to a large extent and probably go with more water-based type paint systems. And maybe surprisingly, but we do have waterborne alkyds and waterborne epoxies that can be used in a lead project. We don't have to just stay with acrylics on a lead project. We have other resin types that we can pull in there depending upon what the circumstances are. And then with additives, we have rheology modifiers, surfactants, skinning agents, just a few of those. But they make up about 5% of a bucket of paint, but can add upwards of about 25% to the cost of a gallon of paint. So better quality paints are going to have some of these additives in it to make them work better. And so let's take a look at some of basic paint calculations and how some of these issues that we had there maybe apply in whenever we talk about paint. So we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of coverage and cost per square foot and wet film versus dry film. That's what the WFT versus the DFT means, and other costs that affect the profitability of different paint products. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this particular slide, and you may think this is going to be the meat of our conversation. This is just strictly an overview of what we have available in terms of some of the math that we use on paint to come up with the information that you see on the data pages. So this is just kind of a brief overview of that, and then we'll move on to those data pages and kind of make a little bit more sense out of this. But whenever we want to figure out what the dry film thickness of a paint product is, we can take the wet film thickness and multiply that times the percent volume solids. And in this particular example, 4 mils wet times 35% volume solids equals 1.4 mils dry film thickness. Now, 1.4 mils in this particular example would be what we would require as a coat of paint. One of the questions I get quite often is what establishes a coat of paint? And it's not taking the roller and rolling it up the wall and then back down the wall. That's not 2 coats. It's not that up the wall is 1 coat and down the wall is a 2nd coat. It really is achieving the mil thickness of that 1.4 in mils in this particular situation. And we'll talk about that as we get to those data pages here in just a minute. So, or with wet film thickness, we can do just the opposite. We take the dry film thickness and divide it by the percent volume solids, and we can come up with what our wet film thickness needs to be to achieve that 1.4 mils dry film thickness. In this particular situation, that would be 4 mils wet to achieve 1.4 mils dry. And you may see in some specifications where there is a wet film thickness specified to achieve a dry film thickness. And this is where that information comes from, is from this particular type of equation. And then with a spread rate, going back to that 1,604 square foot number, wet film thickness, we can take 1,604 square feet at 4 mils wet film thickness and divide it by that, and we can come up with a 402 square feet at 4 mils wet is what that gallon of paint should cover. And then we can take the number of gallons required, we can take the total area square footage and then divide it by the coverage of dry mills. So 40,000 square feet on an example at 402 square feet per gallon at 1.4 mils would equal about 100 gallons of paint for that particular project with this particular product. So then we come to cost per square foot, and cost per square foot divided by the square foot per gallon. And then we can take that one step further and cost per square foot per year's of service. And we'll get into that equation as we get towards the end of our presentation. So let's go on and start taking a look at a little bit more of the math here. And 1,604 is that magic number, and the fact that 1 gallon of liquid will cover 1,604 square feet at 1 mil. So that kind of gives us a starting point, and then we can multiply that 1,604 times the volume solids of the product, or in this particular situation, if we had a high solids product at 85%, we could come up with 1,363.4. We just round that to 1,363 at 1 mil. But if we had a product that goes on at 5 mils to achieve the dry film thickness that we want, that would give us about 273 square feet per gallon out of that particular product. So these are the way these numbers can come together.
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Yes, please.
That's come up. Do you want to wait till the end, or do you want them just in between?
Yeah, if you want to, it probably will help for people to stay a little bit more interested in hearing me ramble on, if we can ask and answer questions as we go through the presentation. So fire away.
Okay. Then if you have questions, put them in the chat and I'll read them out. The first one is, you're talking about a coat of paint being 1.4 mils dry film thickness, but this 1,604 is at 1 mil thickness. Is that wet thickness or dry thickness? And how does that relate to what a quote unquote coat of paint is? Coat it being in parentheses, in quote.
Okay. A couple of things there. And I know some of this stuff is kind of confusing, and doing this as a webinar can even be a little bit more confusing. But let me see if I can back up here to that last slide. Yeah, here we go. In this particular example, that 1,604, that would be how much, I mean, we would get 1,604 square feet coverage at 1 mil. In this particular example, though, we have 4 mils of paint. So, I mean, and so at 4 mils wet at 35% volume solids, it would equal out to that 1.4. Now, by no means do I want to tell you that that 1.4 mils is the dry film thickness for every paint product. That's not the case at all. It really does depend upon the volume solids of the product, and that will give us a better understanding in terms of what the square footage of that particular product is going to be. I've used 35% volume solids as one example. I've used 85% as another example, and as you can see, there's a significant difference in terms of the square foot coverage between those two. So with that in mind, that 1,604 is at 1 mil. So if we had a product, as we have in this example, at 4 mils wet, then that's going to achieve us a 1.4 mil dry film thickness. And that would be for any individual paint product. And again, when we get to the data pages, I can point that out for you in more clarity. So in the theoretical, we're talking the theoretical here. We'll move over to individual data pages here in a minute and hopefully make that a little bit more understandable. Is that helpful? Does that kind of hit the point?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You basically divide that 306 by whatever you need, however many mils of thickness you need to get a coat.
Yes, We're going to get to that level. And the way that we figure out how we measure wet film thickness, this is where I really want to kind of get this to, because this is going to help us to make things a little bit more understandable, I think, here. We have wet film gauges that we use. There are destructive and non-destructive methods for testing mill thickness. The wet film gauges are a way that's non-destructive. We can test for how much paint we have on the surface, and then going back again to what the data page has to say, what our volume solids are, then we know in terms of what square footage of paint, or whether we're in the ballpark in terms of achieving the mill thickness that we need, for this particular product. Because the wet film thickness at the volume solids level that we have is going to give us the equation that we need for dry film thickness. So this example, if we have 6 mils divided by 0.85, that means we got to go on the surface at about 7.05 is the exact number on it. But if we're going to kind of fudge numbers a little bit, it'd be around, need to go on about 7 mils wet to achieve 6 mils dry at 85% volume solids. And the way that we can check that is you see several different gauges types here on the screen. And this is basically a little piece of aluminum that's got little notches in it. And each one of those notches will identify a number of a mill rating on it. So if you look over here at the far right-hand side, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 6 here on this side and moving around. So we would take this particular little piece of metal and we would put it at what we think our mill rating needs to be and put it into the wet paint. And then we'd rock it back and forth just a little bit. It's got feet on either end of it, if you see. And then rock it back and forth a little bit, and it will peak out on as much paint as we have on that surface. So if it was 6 mils, or if it was 7 mils that we had on that surface, then 1 through 6 would be buried on the surface and under the paint film. And we would probably need to move to a different rating. We needed to move to a large enough mill thickness on the gauge so that we could look for that 7 mils. And whenever we see it peak out on the bottom of the notch, then we know that we've achieved that mill thickness. Or maybe we've achieved too much mill thickness, or maybe we've achieved too little mill thickness. In some situations, maybe we need to roll that film out more to get it to the level that it needs to be, or maybe we need to apply more paint. But we can read that and tell that with a wet film gauge. Now, there are other gauges that we have available that are destructive gauges, and one of those being a took gauge, where we actually cut the film and look at it through a magnifying glass to see if we've achieved the right film thickness. And that magnifying glass will have little gradations on it that will give us different mill thicknesses that we can align and decide whether that achieved the dry film thickness it was supposed to. So with that in mind, whenever we talk about coverage cost per square foot, we can take a look at some of the paint examples here in terms of price per gallon and start adding that to the equation. So if we had a gallon of paint that cost $60 a gallon, and it was at 604 square feet, 1,604 square feet, would at the dry film or the wet film thickness we have here, we would get about 4.4 cents per square foot at 1 mil. Now, if we need to put that on at 5 mils, then we would take that 1 mil cost, 4.4 pennies, and multiply that out by 5 to achieve 22 cents per square foot. So that's where we would come up with some of the material cost aspect of this thing. And again, we're going to take this and throw it into an example here later on to kind of get to the cost per square foot per year of service aspect of this particular example. So I've been talking about mils. What is a mil? It's 1/1000th of an inch, or about the thickness of, or about a third of the thickness of a sheet of notebook paper. So a piece of notebook paper would be about 3 mils thick. So paint goes on at a very, very thin rate, but it's amazing stuff because it can achieve long-term coverage and long-term value for you, even at 3, 4, or 5 mils on a surface. Sometimes paint films are referred to in terms of micron. And so if you have microns, it's 25.4 microns equals 1 mil. We here in the United States work off of mils more so than we work off microns. Depending upon what part of the world you're in, you may have microns as being a number that you look at instead of mils. So let's take what we've talked about and look at some data pages and see if we can't make a little bit of sense out of this. So looking at a specific data page, we can run down through here. There's a lot of information on a data page, and we have recommended substrates. We got conformance standards. We got packaging sizes, limitations of use. Product data is really where we kind of have the rubber meet the road on a lot of the information that we were talking about here. But we see, first of all, that this product is DOC compliant in all regulated areas. And then we come over here and take a look at the product data type, and we see that this particular product is 100% acrylic latex. Now, 100% acrylic latex can be used either inside or outside in a lot of situations. This particular data page is for an interior product, but we can get that information off the data pages, whether it's interior or exterior. And then the gloss level, it's a 1 to 4 sheen at 60 degrees, which is a pretty flat product. And then volume solids of 37%. And then the weight solids of 52%. So the VOCs in this particular product are 0. We have that information on there, weight solids versus volume solids. We mostly run off of volume solids here in the paint business. It's a number that we can kind of use as a comparative value. But as I said before, volume solids doesn't mean a whole lot until we know what the differences are between the paint products that we're comparing. So having the 100% acrylic product aspect of it here on our data page will give us a understanding of at least what type of resin we're using. And in that understanding, whenever we compare it to other types of paint, then we will have that as our first comparative value. So as I said before, we have the gloss here at 1 to 4 as flat. The higher up we go on that sheen range, the higher gloss that we have. Mostly in the paint business, we have flats, we have satins, we have eggshells, semi-glosses, and glosses would be 5 of the most common type of paints. Now, there are a lot of different varying sheens on things. We have a wealth of different sheens that get called out by individual manufacturers as pearlescence or as low sheens or different ideas of sheen to try to differentiate themselves from one another. MPI gives a pretty good, Master Painters Institute gives a pretty good gloss reference guide, and is one that most of us paint companies are referring to a lot of times nowadays. But anytime that you see that 1 to 4 aspect of it, you know that you're in a flat range, and the data page should point that out for you. So we should get about 400 square feet per gallon coverage out of this at a dry film thickness of 1.5. And so with that in mind, we're going to use those numbers to do a little comparative value here. So we have 100% acrylic, we have a flat sheen, 37% volume solids, 0 VOC, 400 square feet per gallon coverage at 1.5 mils, VOC compliant. So now let's look at another data page and see a similar situation. We do have here, it's VOC compliant in all regulated areas. This is a vinyl acrylic versus being 100% acrylic. The sheen is 0 to 4. Our previous product was 1 to 4 at a 60 and 85 degree meter gloss meter reading. So we have a different type of a product here, vinyl acrylic versus 100% acrylic. And then we have a volume solids of 34%, so about 3% less on volume solids, but still 0 VOC. So comparative, we could take these two products and stick them side by side, and they would have some very good comparative value here. But really kind of the question is coverage, 400 square feet per gallon, and then the dry film thickness of 1.4 mils. So we're 1/10 of a mil less than the other product is, but that would be understandable because we're 3% less in terms of volume solids. So that would, but there'd still be in a comparative value even at that. So we have 34% volume solids, flat sheen, 0 VOC, 400 square feet, square footage coverage on at 1.4 mils, VOC compliant, and vinyl acrylic resin. So which one is better? And the first thing I would say to you, one of my favorite terms in the paint business is it depends. There is a reason why I would say it depends, because it really does depend upon what we want to achieve. Are we looking for stain resistance? We're working for scrub numbers. What exactly do we want to achieve with this particular product? One product could be better than the other depending upon that. Are we looking for a cost effectiveness in terms of price per gallon? Those are all matters that we need to take into consideration whenever we're saying one is better than the other. Because product 1 here, or 100% acrylic product, has got better scrub resistance than what product 2 does. But whenever we take a look at stain testing, product 2 has pretty darn good stain testing to it also. So between the two, if your stain resistance is the issue, you might be able to save a little bit on the product number in terms of cost per gallon by using the vinyl acrylic product. Vinyl acrylics really are pretty darn good products from that point of view. We really don't want to put those outside because of that aspect of the potential to fade and to chalk in exterior exposure. But whenever it comes to interior products, there are most of the products that you'll see probably in specifications are vinyl acrylic products because they do an excellent job. You can get flatter flats with them. There's a range of reasons why it would be an excellent product to use for interior exposure. Exterior exposure, again, I'm going to lean on the 100% acrylic as being where we really want to be for exterior. So where does all this information lead us? To some kind of basic information. Better quality ingredients make a better quality paint. That's first thing. So if we're using better quality resin and we're using better quality pigments, we're going to get a better quality paint product. Lesser quality ingredients on the converse side of it means lesser quality paint. Now, sometimes price point really is the issue. If you were looking at a multifamily project versus a $1 million house on the residential side, chances are there's going to be a significant difference in terms of the paint products used in those particular circumstances. With a multifamily project, you're going to have turn times on apartments, and as such, normally go in and code requires that you repaint the apartment every time that someone moves out. With that being the case, using a lesser quality product probably makes a little bit of sense because you're going to be, if you turn those things on an annual basis or biannual basis, then repainting that thing, we're going to build up paint thickness to the degree over a period of time that it might become a bit of an issue from maintenance point of view in terms of cracking or different things can happen with paint. Whereas with a $1 million house, probably somebody that's putting that much money into a home doesn't really want to have to repaint on a very often basis. So we want to pick the paint product based upon the project type and what the budget numbers are for. So better quality paints normally give better mil per square foot coverage. Better quality paints normally last longer, and better quality paints normally cost more per gallon. But that's just really where we start the story at, because better quality paints have better life expectancy and probably in terms of long-term maintenance, better maintenance aspect, and so on. So whenever we start looking at these things and talk about better quality paint lasts better and longer and wear better and longer, then it really depends upon what we want to achieve with the paint product. So if the life expectancy is longer, then it would stand to reason that maintenance cost should be lower. So if we're looking at a commercial paint project, and we're looking at that from a owner owning that project for the next 50 years or whatever, they maybe would want to invest a little bit more money in their paint finishes so that they would have a lesser maintenance aspect of things. Now, if it's a turnkey project and you're going to hand over the key to a new owner and that new owner is going to sell that project as quick as they can turn it, maybe not. It really is dependent upon what the owner wants to achieve with their individual project and whether that's going to be a factor in terms of the paint decision. So labor to apply a better quality paint can many times be less due to better application characteristics. We mentioned additives a while ago, and the additives in there can make the paint go on easier, smoother, and with less application issues. And then also, whenever we're talking about maintenance, the inconvenience factor, and this is something that needs to be thought about in new construction, is what the maintenance issue is going to be for the long term there, because there are potential odor issues in occupied spaces, displaced workforce if we're having to paint during the daytime and move people out of their normal spaces, potential parking issues if we have exterior paint work and need to move around parking for the sake of potential overspray and things of that nature, and then scaffolding and lifts around the building, after-hour supervision. There's a wealth of different things. This is just a list of a few. There's more issues to be taken in consideration there too. So with that in mind, the lesser time that we have to repaint a building or portions of the building, the better off we're going to be. And so these expectations go back to what's the owner's paint maintenance expectation. As I mentioned before, is this a turnkey project or is this a project that they're going to occupy for a number of years? We probably have two totally different scenarios there. But once the owner's made up their mind in terms of what they want for a paint scenario, then we can put that together in such a way that it can meet their needs and meet it in their budgets. Each project needs to be evaluated on its own merits, however, and this is where I get on my soapbox here and talk about cutting and pasting specs from one spec to another. It does have some risk attached to it. Here's some statistics that we were able to glean. 57% of architects copy and paste from previous paint specs. Probably no great surprise to any architects that we have on our call today. 16% reuse previous specs in their entirety. I would say both of those scenarios could be a little bit dangerous. We need to take a look at individual substrates and each individual environment on an individual basis. If we put latex paint in a shower stall, and I did examples in here because it really did happen on a project. I was doing an inspection on a jail project a few years ago, and while in there, we were looking at paint finishes and started to kind of pick around on some paint products and realized that a paint had got misinstalled. There was a gang shower in the common area, and had got painted with latex paint. That's not a good thing to do. We need to put an epoxy or something of a higher grade nature in a shower area. But epoxy paint in a storage closet, probably overkill the opposite direction. Very rarely will you ever need epoxy paint in a storage closet. Now, if we're in a warehouse area, things of that nature, all bets are off. And yes, that epoxy would be great to use in that environment. But we really need to make sure that we get the right paint product in the right place. So if we're reusing a specification and end up getting things where they not need to be, then that's not necessarily a good thing. So with the different spec I mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was trying to interrupt you before, and I had myself muted, so that didn't work. I have a couple of questions.
All right.
And one of them is, I think, a really good one to do right now. Does the specifier need to specify a mill thickness per coat, or is it safe to say thicknesses as specified by manufacturer? And or is there any instance where someone should specify verifying the mill thickness, the old trust or verify thing?
And then the answer is that's a great question. It really is. There is one of two things happens here. If you get a lot of the specifications, I'm not sure exactly if TreeView and BSD is using a mill thickness in their paint section. I know Spec Wizard does. That if you specify a product in Spec Wizard, that it will give you the dry film thickness. It will tell you apply at a rate of, to achieve a dry film thickness of 1.5 mils or whatever. It's not a bad thing to do. The issue that I would say to you more than anything else, in one form or fashion, either referencing it to the data page or to the label instructions on the paint product, or putting the mill thickness on specifications would be a good idea.
Is it safer to say, rather than trying to follow up and keep up with all of those different things, because paints get reformulated and things change over time, and as much as we would all like to spend time keeping our master up to date, it really doesn't happen. Is it safer to say mill thickness, dry film mill thickness, or wet film mill thickness as required by manufacturer or as recommended by manufacturer? So if the product data sheet says 4 mil wet thickness, you're automatically saying, hey, whatever the manufacturer says in their published data.
Yeah, I would say you're safe with that kind of language in there. But in some form or fashion, specifying or having in your specifications to follow the label instructions, data pages, things of that nature, gives you a safe bet in terms of what you need to achieve. Now, having said all that, the other aspect of it is inspect, inspect, inspect. Because I guess to say it in a way that sometimes things get forgotten. Sometimes that a dry coat of paint looks like it could be the mill thickness, and sometimes it's not. So if you really are needing to make sure that the mill thicknesses are where they need to be, a wet film gauge or requiring inspections as part of your language.
Is there maybe a recommended percentage of random spot checks for painting that you would recommend? Say, test 20% of the locations or 10% of the locations in a random spot check, so that, if they're going to be spot checked the painter may be more likely to behave. Not implying that.
I would probably stay away from trying to say a percentage and just leave it as open-ended that basically everything needs to be inspected. Yeah, and
Okay.
with having said that, okay, you can, and I've seen language and specifications in the past where it does say that the painter and his applicators will have a wet film gauge and use a wet film gauge on an ongoing basis to kind of build some of that language into the specification and let them know that that there is a way of checking wet films to understand dry films to achieve the system's numbers that are in the specification. And that part of that information needs to probably go back to the GC that's on that information needs to be part of their checks also. But if we were doing this in person, a lot of times I'll leave wet film gauges at offices. Just so if you have that piece of aluminum in your hand whenever you walk on a job site, you might be a little bit more of a scare tactic, if anything. But if they know that what wet film gauge is, that's good stuff.
Right. So it sounds like, though, definitely if you're doing say a public project or a school or something that's going to be prone to getting a lot of use or very intensive use, requiring some sort of contractor field QC on paint thicknesses and paint applications as a general rule of thumb is to at least bring up the topic and say, hey, we need to make sure this is going on the way it should be.
I like that. You said it well. I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Sorry, keep going.
Was there any other questions?
Just a question, will your PowerPoint slides be available as a PDF after the webinar? Because there's a lot of information, there's a lot of great information here.
And the answer to that is yes, we can make this available. It's just if you, again, my contact information will be at the end. If you want to send me a quick email, we can certainly make this available to you, because you're exactly right. There is a lot of information in here. And the intent of this thing is to kind of think a little bit past just paint is paint, because it really is not. And if we get to that point, and if anybody needs this information to go back and reference to, you're certainly welcome to it. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking about,
I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, one more question.
That's great.
MPI.
Master Painters Institute.
MPI is basis of design. Are you going to talk a little bit about that?
I can. I don't have MPI written in here because, well, let's talk about MPI for a minute, because it is written in here. BSD Spec Link MPI, or Paint Manufacturer as basis of design. They have a couple different options, as does the TreeView, in terms of using MPI. That's really a whole nother topic in and of itself. That might be one we want to think about at some point in time. But MPI, Master Painters Institute, came into the United States in its infancy. It was a Canadian-based organization that has changed now. It's now based here in the United States. And the U.S. Navy and different military part of the U.S. government brought that in, trying to find a way to upgrade their paint specifications from old technology that they had written into their government contracts. It began to gain a foothold because people were looking for a way of specifying paint and doing it as generically as possible, and not leaving out manufacturers by not listing them as approved, and so on and so forth. And as of today, there's probably a list of 50 or 60 paint manufacturers that have a MPI product listed or more, that are listed on the MPI website at paintinfo.com. If you wanted to go out there, you can find a lot of information on MPI. MPI works off of individual system numbers. MPI 1 through, I'm guessing, maybe 160 product categories now, maybe 170. They continue to change. They continue to add new categories. They put recycled paint in, different things of that nature. So MPI in and of itself is a kind of a generic way to write paint specifications. Us paint manufacturers pay a fee to MPI to get our products listed on their site, and they do testing on it depending upon what level of MPI category it happens to be. Depends upon what kind of testing they do. but we pay them some pretty hefty fees to be listed in MPI. They also have a sheen.
Now,
yes.
yeah, go ahead. One of the problems I've always had with the MPI is there are generic descriptions of paint types, and within that paint type, there may be 6 or 7 paints from a manufacturer that fit that description. And
Right.
It could be a residential quality paint, it could be an industrial quality paint, it could be a premium architectural quality paint. So MPI in and of itself does not have any way of establishing a level of quality within those categories. So if you're going to use MPI as a way of specifying paint, you have to have more language in there to specify within the MPI categories. I want the premium architectural quality products, or I want the residential quality products. Because if you just say the MPI category number, then you're going to get whatever the cheapest one in that category is.
You have hit on that, probably my biggest sore spot with MPI. And if you'll look on the screen here, spec writers must know the level of quality of each manufacturer they specify. That becomes extremely important in all specification specifying paint as a general rule. But MPI, as you well said, that's a key factor there. One of the things that I recommend, if you're going to write around MPI, that's great. But I would still, if you have pre-approved vendors that you are allowing on that specification, I would take the products for each one of those manufacturers and write them into the specification. So if you had company A, B, and C, I would put their equal products in there with the MPI number as what you would accept for the project. Because as you well stated, there is a list of different products on most categories. And then conversely, there are some categories that have literally nobody that's submitted a product for, or only have one product in there. And if you only have one product in there, then basically you're close specking it to that individual company. And it would be better to keep it of a competitive nature by having at least 3 companies in there. And if you list the product that you will approve out of that category for those manufacturers, then you have kind of allowed yourself to use MPI as basis design and use that for your paint systems. But you've also tied it down so that you have a level of quality and you're not having to do some significant submittal review when you see products come through for that project. Does that make sense?
Sounds great. Didn't mean to get you out of your flow. I'll let you finish your presentation. I did get a note from Daniel Hargrave saying we are going to be able to post the PDF of this presentation to the CSINext site, to the past webinar portion of the website. So we'll get it from Kent, but I'm sure he would also love to have individual people email him and ask specific questions. So
sure.
Why don't you go on, because we've got about 10 minutes to go. We started a little late, so you can run a little over, but you got to respect people's time. So. Well,
I've got about 3 hours worth of content here. No, I'm just kidding. It's not quite that bad. You're actually getting close to where we want to go here. But whenever it comes to paint, and this last comment down here is a little bit self-serving, but it says next to door and hardware section, paint's the least liked section to write. And I've been told that numerous times. I've been an architect rep for close to 17 years now. I've been in the paint business for over 40. And to that degree, I've ran into that comment time and time again. So from that point of view, I know paint's not the easiest thing to write. But that's the reason why, we paint representatives out here that call on architectural firms, and I'm not just referring to my company, but across the board. We want to help in those kind of situations and make this easier. I know you have door and hardware consultants that you can rely on for the door and hardware aspect of it. And just keep in mind, you do have that same resource through us paint manufacturers. So with that in mind, surface preparation, clean, dry, and dull. That's the quick 3 on that. Surface preparation is very, very important, though. The better the surface preparation, the longer the paint system will last. I can take a lesser paint system, put it over a better prepared surface, and get better longevity out of that. And hopefully you can see on the bottom of your screen, 90% of all paint failures are related to poor surface preparation. You probably have language, 2 or 3 paragraphs or more in your specifications now, especially if you're using any of the spec services that relate to clean, dry, and dull on the for your specifications. But it really is one of the most important aspects of surface preparation. Now, with application, I'm going to move on into this kind of quickly. We have brush, roll, and spray. And this goes back to my comment before, it depends. There's really no best way to apply paint. Brush, roll, or spray are all three very economical ways to do it in the right set of circumstances. It can be very uneconomical. If we take a web joist ceiling with decking up there and we brush and roll that thing, that's not very economical. But if we take a dry fog and spray that ceiling, that can be very economical. We can cover a lot of square footage and do it well in a short period of time. And time is money, as you all well know. So whenever it comes to brushes, there's a right application tool for latex paints, alkyds, and epoxies. So pay attention to the label instructions. Now, this is really not anything that we're going to put into specifications. This is strictly informational from that point of view. If you're on a job site and you see somebody using relatively cheap brushes and you're noticing in the wall finishes that there's brush hairs in the walls, or if you're noticing a lot of stipple, or you're noticing things of that nature, this is just the reason why I'm throwing this information up here to you, because there is a right tool for applying paint. And with latex and waterborne alkyd products, a right roller cover with solvent based alkyds and with epoxies and so on, there's a right cover. So we have a listing here: 3/8 inch for flat and eggshell finishes, 1/4 inch or mohair for semi-gloss or gloss finishes. The higher the sheen, the lower the nap would be the rule of thumb on this. And then with alkyds and solvent-based materials, we have land wool covers and synthetic covers that are made to resist the solvents that need to be used. So using the right roller stipple, or right roller nap will be the right thing to do to give us the right kind of finish. When it comes to spray application, there is a wealth of different spray applications. The most common one for new constructions is airless spray. We have HVLP, high volume, low pressure systems available, air-driven air systems, air-driven airless systems. We've got air systems that you can be utilized. It really is dependent on what's the best usage of material and best usage of equipment to achieve the finish. The biggest thing here, and above all application tools, is the applicator. The experience level, the bonded insurance aspect of it, financially stable, properly equipped, staffed properly. Here in Nashville, we're having a heck of a time trying to get labor on jobs. We have a ton of construction going on, and it's not just in the paint side of it, it's through all trades that we're short on labor here. So finding those experienced, insured, bonded, financially stable type of applicators is going to be to your best advantage if that is something that you have control over or input to, because they can make or break a paint project, really can. The last thing you want to have happen is a guy start a job and then walk out mid-job because he bid it too cheap. And applicators that are quality of nature, they won't do that to you. And so other things that affect the cost is the longevity of the paint system, the handling of the material, mixing, disposal. The painting schedule is kind of important. We don't want to be painting in cold temperatures, and if the paint schedule calls for painting outside in cold temperatures, we may want to try to get involved in that and maybe change that up. The number of coats, the recoat windows, induction times. If we have 2-component epoxies, it takes a while to mix 2-component products together, and there are sweat-in times and things of that nature. So we want to make sure that that's been figured into the whole process. And then equipment use, the spray tips, and the different things that are wearable or that wear out need to be figured into it. Now, I brought all that information to you to get to this cost per square foot per year of service aspect of things. We're going to compare two product systems. We're going to compare an acrylic 3-coat DTN or direct to metal acrylic system, and we're going to compare a epoxy urethane system, a coat of epoxy primer and 2 coats of urethane. So either one of these could be used over a metal surface. So 3 coats of the DTM at 30 cents a square foot times 3 coats is 90 cents a square foot applied cost. So 90 cents divided by 5 years, which would be kind of an average for an acrylic system, would give us 18 cents per square foot per year of service. Now, conversely, if we took the epoxy primer at 70 cents a square foot and urethane at 60 cents a square foot, that's a total 3-coat system cost of $1.90 a square foot. If we divide that by 15 years, that comes out to 13 cents a square foot per year of service. So totally different in terms of years of service. And that's where this really kind of comes down to. It's not just the cost per gallon. If I told you that, a bucket of paint cost $100, all probably sounds pretty expensive, but if I told you that $100 gallon of paint would last 15 years, would that be something that might have a little bit of change in your thought pattern? So that really is where we kind of come to this thing. And I want to read this last comment down here at the bottom of the page to you verbatim, because this is an example. Everything's not going to come out to the kind of numbers that we have here. If we want to look at this thing on a really in-depth basis, we can certainly help to develop these numbers for you. But cost per square foot from a reputable painting firm. I've got one here in Nashville I worked with to achieve some of these numbers. Life expectancy of coating systems is an average for light to mid-tone colors in a mild environment. And these comparisons should not be construed as a guarantee. So you need to contact your paint representative with questions. Color does make a difference. Brighter colors, more saturated colors, ultra deep colors might not have the same years of service aspect to them as lighter and mid-tone colors will. So there are some variables in this whole aspect of it. But whenever we're talking about this, I said 13 cents a square foot for the urethane system versus 18 for the acrylic system, but that's really just kind of the start of the equation, because 90 cents per square foot is actually $2.70 per square foot for 15 years because of the need to repaint at 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years. So if we took that first system, the epoxy urethane system, that really does give us a better value overall in terms of where we could come out with this thing. So there is value in using better quality paint products and systems, better paint products, better surface preparation, quality application pays back in the number of years of service. So, you know, kind of think about this, and maybe instead of cut and paste next time around, take a look at some of these things from a per system and per substrate point of view, and you might be able to help your owner out along the way. And with that, they may actually thank you for the effort you put into that. So we're here in the paint industry to help with a lot of different things. We call us with questions. We do site surveys, guide specification, colors, recommend painting contractors if the need be for those kind of things. And I know some of this probably applies more to general contractors than maybe to architects, but in that same vein, if anyone needs any help with that kind of thing, that's what we're here for. So believe it or not, we have covered everything on this page in about the hour that we have been moving forward with this. And if anybody has questions, we'll take those here in just a minute, but I want to run through a quick little quiz with you for a minute. I have 3 different questions here. What are the 3 important steps to good surface preparation? And if you were looking back on that one slide that we had, that answer to that thing would be clean, dry, and dull. If I was doing this in your office, I would have door prizes, but seeing how we're doing this online, we're going to, or through a computer, we're going to just give you the answers and move forward with the questions. The higher the volume solids of a paint, the better the paint. True or false? And we would say false on that, because it really depends upon the ingredients that make up the volume solids as to the level of quality that we have in that paint product. And then a gallon of liquid spread at 1 mil will cover how many square feet? That 1604 number should be coming to mind pretty quickly for you here. So with all that said and done, we have covered our content. Any other questions? I'll be glad to handle those now, or Catherine, I'll turn it back over to you. And I thank you for your time, and thanks for being a participant with us today. We'll get the certificates out to you in a short period of time. And certainly any questions that you may have after the fact, you have my contact information here. You're welcome to give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to respond. So thanks for your time today.
Kent, thank you so much for a great presentation. I know there's a lot of material there, and there's a lot of questions and stuff. And please, everybody, please write down Kent's email address. He's a great resource for follow-up questions, and we will try to get the presentation posted to the CSINext website. Also, remember, at the end of the webinar, we're going to have a form to fill out so you get your CEU credits. And if you don't get the form when you finish, when you jump out of the meeting, it'll come in the mail tomorrow. And stay tuned. Next month, we should be having a presentation from National Gypsum. I'm not exactly sure of the name of the presentation, but that's just because I'm badly organized today. So my apologies, and stay tuned to the CSINext website and your email address for what that presentation is going to be. It should be another great one. Again, Kent, thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights today. It's been real helpful. So I hope you're all having a great January, and we will see you again next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.